A major hallmark of victim mentality is believing that you don't have choices, that the world is acting on you and there's nothing you can do about it, rather than that you actually have choices and can have agency in your life. I sincerely did not believe I had victim mentality when I first started learning about it in recovery. I have always felt like a rather powerful woman who has agency in her life. The problem with not seeing or believing that you have choices is that if you don't think you have choices, then making choices is not really possible for you. If you don't think something exists, then you won't see it, even if it's right in front of you. Even choices.
Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, where I help people heal their emotional, psychological, and spiritual wounds and make deep, lasting changes in their lives. I'm the founder and CEO of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. I'm a boundaries coach who specializes in helping women who are focused on what others are thinking and doing and neglect themselves in the process. And I have coached hundreds of people on how to build healthy boundaries using my exclusive Build framework. On this podcast, I share my experience, strength, and hope from recovery. I don't support or endorse any particular 12-step recovery fellowship, and I don't claim to speak for any particular 12-step fellowship. I also don't believe that 12-step recovery is the only way to recover. You might need additional help. I'm an avid beachcomber who collects sea glass, shells, wood, and stones. I am a formerly closeted fan of the Hallmark Channel, especially the Christmas movies. Hello, Christmas in July. I wear fingerless gloves from September to June because my hands are always cold, so I have about 15 pairs. And I get a huge kick out of counting how many days, weeks, and months there are until my birthday or Christmas at completely random times of the year. My hope is that you'll find my words concretely helpful in improving your life, whether you're in recovery or not. If you like what you've heard on this episode, please screenshot it and share it on your social media and tag me at Higher Power Coaching.
This is episode 266, How to Stop Victimizing Yourself and Reclaim Your Power. Learning that I had victim mentality and coming out of it was hands down the biggest mindset shift of my recovery. And I continue to come out of it to this day. It's just much more subtle than it was 9 years ago when I got into recovery. And that's why I have 6 previous episodes about victim mentality, because it's been such a core part of my recovery, and I share as things come to mind for me. I will link those other episodes in the show notes for you. The other night, something came up in the Guilt-Free Guild. This is my twice monthly coaching group for women, and it made me realize I need to do another podcast on victim mentality. Today's episode will focus on how we victimize or re-victimize ourselves. Before I go into that, I want to just say something about what victim mentality is, in case you're not familiar, because it's not about you being weak or bad or anything like that. It's a way of thinking that we've internalized, very likely because we've been victimized in some way in our lives. And even if you don't believe you've been victimized, which was the case for me, you can still have victim mentality because it's a mentality, a way of thinking. And that also means it's a way of thinking and you can change it. A major hallmark of victim mentality is believing that you don't have choices, that the world is acting on you and there's nothing you can do about it, rather than that you actually have choices and can have agency in your life. I sincerely did not believe I had victim mentality when I first started learning about it in recovery. I have always felt like a rather powerful woman who has agency in her life. The problem with not seeing or believing that you have choices is that if you don't think you have choices, then making choices is not really possible for you. If you don't think something exists, then you won't see it, even if it's right in front of you. Even choices. Having the lights come on, so to speak, about victim mentality was so fucking huge for me. Where it started to come clear to me was in my relationship inventory in step 4. Doing that inventory showed me how my codependence got worse over time in my romantic relationships. And also that in every one of those relationships, I thought to myself, well, if he would just change X, then everything would be okay. After seeing that about the 10th guy in a row, I began to see that I was acting like I had nothing to do with the status of those relationships, even though I was 50% of each of those relationships. And what is really hilarious is that I know that before recovery, I used to say to friends over the years when they would complain about their partners, whether women or men, hey, you know what? You are 50% of the relationship, which means you are 50% responsible for the status of the relationship. And yet, I couldn't see that as also being true about myself. I could see it in other people and in their relationships, but I couldn't see it about myself. See how I could spot that victim mentality in others, but not in myself? Actually, I was very good at spotting it in others because those were the people I was going to rescue. Thus, I had lots of friends who lived in victim mentality and complained about their partners. One of the many problems with this mentality is that it's such a deeply entrenched way of thinking that it's really hard to spot, and it becomes a habituated way of thinking. This is why I have so many episodes on this topic, because I continue to come further and further out of the mentality, but it's harder to spot now because what's left of the mentality is more subtle and nuanced than the really obvious victim mentality of if he would just fill in the blank, then everything would be okay. Before I go on, I want to stress that we have victim mentality for a reason. It doesn't come from nowhere. You got it from being victimized in some way at some point, probably in childhood. And if you have a victim mentality, the unfortunate thing is that you are much more likely to be victimized by others because they see you as an easy target. Now, that may or may not be conscious on their part, just like it's not conscious on your part that you have victim mentality or wasn't conscious on your part. That's the insidious thing about mentalities. They seem like the truth or the way things are, so we don't spot them as ways of thinking that can change. If you're being victimized by someone, you can't change them, but you can change you. And victimization can come in a variety of forms. People tend to think of someone who is overtly abused and treated horribly as a victim. But sometimes it can be so fucking subtle. I recently had a call with a client who was telling me the situation with her girlfriend. Her girlfriend was accusing my client of playing the victim. She was literally victimizing my client about being a victim. And my client was shocked when I said, she's victimizing you by saying that. A loving, caring partner who thought their partner was acting out of victim mentality wouldn't use it as a weapon and an accusatory fashion against that person. They'd have a loving, kind, and compassionate conversation with them about it. The sad truth is, we don't just feel victimized by the world and other people. We actually do things to victimize ourselves. One thing I did to victimize myself the most frequently when I first got into recovery, I did it my whole life, but I started to see it when I got in recovery, is what I call living into the wreckage of the future. Some people call it catastrophizing. And though this has decreased massively over the years, it's still the most difficult thing for me to deal with in my life, to not catastrophize. My mind wants to think about all the bad things that are going to happen. And it wants to rehearse all the shitty conversations that I'm going to have in the future. I am so much better at catching myself now than I was in the past, but I used to do it all the fucking time. And it was basically victimizing myself. So here's an example. I would imagine conversations in my head with someone, and I'd be like, well, I'm going to say this, and then she's going to say that, and then I'm going to say this, she's going to say that, and then I'd be like, God damn her. So I'd fantasize about these scenarios where I was living into the wreckage of the future and how shitty things were going to happen to me, and it was always the other person's fault. And I was picturing all these scenarios as if I was going to be a victim. But I didn't understand that I was doing that. And I think it was the call on the Guilt-Free Guild the other night that brought this to my awareness. In fact, at first, I didn't even know that I was living into the wreckage of the future until recovery. But once I saw it, I didn't know that I was painting myself as a victim in every one of those fantasies. Now, mind you, not one of those damn scenarios ever happened in real life. And by the way, it's been a long time since I had one of those fake conversations in my head. The kind of catastrophizing I do now doesn't usually involve others, at least not very often anymore. I was victimizing myself by creating a scenario where I assumed bad shit is going to happen to me and it's someone else's fault. So that is one part of me victimizing myself. But another part of me victimizing myself is what I'm doing in that very moment when I'm having that disgusting, horrible fantasy about the future. It's what I'm doing to my nervous system. When I do that, I'm knocking my nervous system out of whack by getting all aggravated and shit about something that's not actually happening. And this is super important to understand. Our body doesn't know the difference between something that's actually happening and something we're imagining happening. This is why we get a flood of adrenaline just by thinking about something, why our hearts start racing just by thinking about something. So when you're practicing living into the wreckage of the future, you are having the effect on your body as if that shit was really happening right now. Now, if I think about that in my life, if I multiply that out to all the decades I did that and all of the scores and scores and scores of times that I did that, I assaulted my own body and my own psyche repeatedly for years with the inner drugstore of the chemicals that make me feel like I'm having an emergency inside. And if that is not victimizing myself, I don't know what is. Here's the thing. You have choices about what you think. You get to change the channel when you realize you're thinking something that's detrimental to you. Now, it is definitely hard when you have a well-worn groove in your brain from all those shitty thoughts. Yes, it is difficult to stop these types of thoughts from coming, but it's absolutely possible to stop them once they arrive and you've seen them. I am living proof, and there are millions of other people in the world, especially in recovery, who are also living proof that these changes can happen. We learned to change the way that we're thinking, and you can do. And the more you do it, the less frequently those thoughts will come on their own. But it's almost like you have to go to war against them, like they're an enemy. I'm not a huge fan of using war metaphors, but in this case, I think it's a very apt metaphor. You cannot have a positive life when all you're doing is thinking negative shit, especially when you're thinking that you're the victim of all this shit that's going to happen around you. But you can stop it. Freedom of choice is one of the greatest freedoms of recovery. It's also, in my mind, the greatest freedom of building healthy boundaries. And for me, the greatest choice of all the choices is that I get the freedom to choose what I'm going to think. What can you do to stop victimizing yourself you can understand that when you are thinking through scenarios in which you are always have negative things happen to you, that is you victimizing yourself by assuming bad shit's going to happen. And if you've been doing that, it's clear evidence that you have victim mentality. And also, you should probably listen to all those other episodes that I linked in the show notes. On top of victimizing yourself, when you live into the wreckage of the future, you're not living in the present moment, which is the only moment during which you have any kind of power. You're not making choices in the present moment about how to live your life. You're not making choices about how to think inside your head. Now, your brain's job is to think, so you might as well give it good shit to think about on purpose instead of letting it run wild. Talk to yourself more than you listen to yourself. One of the ways I, quote, talk to myself is that I have notes all over my house. I have many other ways that I talk to myself too. And I have these notes on my phone and in my journals. I write on the mirrors in my house. Just this weekend, I put a whole bunch more notes all over the place. I stuck 2 notes in my wallet. I stuck a note in my car, in my makeup drawer, a whole bunch of other places to remind me that I get to keep focusing on how awesome things are and how awesome things are going to be. Even though I've always been a very optimistic person and I've done shit tons of work on myself, I still need reminders all the time. I doubt there's anybody on the planet who doesn't need reminders all the time to not live into the wreckage of the future. Another way that I victimized myself was to put myself in harm's way and make myself unnecessarily vulnerable to other people. If someone in your life treats you like shit, don't go to that person with anything personal, hoping that this time they'll change. You're victimizing yourself when you do that. Now, I did that shit all the time. I put myself in harm's way by sharing personal and private information with people, making myself unnecessarily vulnerable, going to the hardware store for milk. In other words, trying to get like affection or approval or whatever from somebody who's literally never fucking given it to me. Now, I'm not sharing all of this with you to give yourself another reason to beat the shit out of yourself. I'm sharing because this is about self-empowerment. When you start to see that you have this mentality, you then have hope of coming out of it. And you can start to see that you have choices in places that you never believed that you had choices before. When someone says, I didn't have a choice about something, that is never the case. You always have a choice. Your choices might suck. We sometimes call that being stuck between a rock and a hard place, or we say, I'm damned if I do, and I'm damned if I don't. Or we might say, I have to pick the lesser of two evils. We have those sayings to describe situations in which we only have shitty choices. Now, it's clear that we do. A rock and a hard place, those are 2 different choices. Now, whatever's going on in your life, you may feel like you don't have choices, but you always do. They just might be shitty options. What's empowering about making choices is even if they're shitty, it gives you power. When you think, I don't have a choice, you have no power. But when you make a choice, even if it's for something shitty, you have power. You have freedom. You're not being forced to end it into anything, and you know it. You are in charge of your life. Other people are not. You become an actor and not a reactor in your life. And that, my friends, is what it means to overcome victim mentality.
I was recently reminded by a friend that when I first started recovery, I didn't feel lovable. I almost can't believe that I used to feel that way, and that I kind of forgot something so profound because I truly love myself now. And I want that for everybody. If you don't love yourself, there's literally nothing that can make up for that. I created something exclusively for my private clients since many of them don't love themselves. And I've now opened up my private vault to share it with up to 10 people individually. It's called the Self-Love Sprint. You'll grow to love yourself and truly feel worthy so you can stop saying yes when you really want to say no, stop neglecting yourself and putting everyone else first. Stop saying all kinds of nasty shit to yourself. That is not what people who love themselves and feel deserving do. You'll stop being afraid that others will think that you're selfish for taking time to care for yourself. This is also for you if you don't really know who you are because you've always been such a fucking chameleon. Go to higherpowercc.com/love sprint. Remember, I'm only offering 10 of these, so don't wait. If you like this podcast, and I'm guessing you did or you wouldn't still be listening, then you're gonna love the other things I have to offer. If you'd love pre-released podcast scripts and episodes before anyone else gets them, or if you'd love access to content from my private vault that I developed exclusively for my private clients, which is like having a work session with me without me actually being there, go to patreon.com/higherpowercoaching. There are 3 tiers ranging from as low as $4 up to $24 a month. You'll also love my weekly newsletter, Friday Fragments, which has content very similar to the podcast. You can check it out at fridayfragments.news. That's fridayfragments.news. Please like and subscribe to my podcast on your favorite podcast outlet. I'd also love it if you'd leave a review, which you can do either in the show notes or on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find my podcast so they can get the benefits you've gotten from listening. If someone came to mind when you listen to this particular episode, please share it with them. And my favorite place to hang out on social media is Instagram. I'm at Higher Power Coaching. Please DM me there. I'd love to hear what you got from this episode. I run group and private coaching programs on building healthy boundaries. Whether you need help with boundaries in your personal, professional, or romantic life, I can help. Head on over to barbchat.net, where you can hop onto my calendar for a free 30-minute Better Boundaries consultation. My ideal client is someone who is ripe for change. If that's you, I would love to work with you. My goal with all my work is to help you make lasting changes in your life like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. Remember, it's never too late to recover. No one is beyond hope, and healing is possible. Thanks for listening.